Is the UFC in a decline? In my honest opinion, I really do think it is. Now, I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that the UFC has been feeding us, really low quality fight nights, mixed with the fact that we're still fighting in the Apex. And my honest opinion, I really do feel like the UFC still hosting fights in the Apex is always going to miss something. What it's missing is the crowd. I think that MMA fights should be in front of an entire freaking stadium, in my honest opinion. And I really don't see why the UFC is still having the Apex, host some of these fight nights, but that's just my honest opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Let's go ahead and react to this video. Of course, the link to this original video is going to be in the description, but let's go ahead and react to this right now.
Right into it. Number one, from a divisional standpoint, is the UFC in decline. Number two, what about Star Wars?
That's impossible!
I mean star power, both overall and also in each division. Three, overall card quality. And of course, how does this all compare with other eras? And so just a quick disclaimer, I'm mostly removing the beginnings of divisions. They almost always kind of suck when they first start. They don't even have their footing yet, so how are they supposed to be good? So let's get right into the divisions and start with heavyweights. This is almost certainly the biggest grievance I have in terms of divisions, minus women's featherweight, which has never really been a real division. Objectively, 265 is the worst right now and probably one of the worst states it's ever been in, and absolutely has been on the decline in recent years.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall, that entire situation, like we saw Tom Aspinall pretty much defend his interim belt, which is embarrassing. Defending an interim belt is just, since when has the UFC done that? In my honest opinion, they should have been calling for the Jon Jones fight a long freaking time ago. Stipe Miocic is no reason for him to fight Jon Jones at all, right? He's an old man. He hasn't had a fight since forever. He lost his last fight against Francis Ngannou. There's really no reason why Jon Jones should be challenging Stipe Miocic at all. He needs to be facing the interim belt or the interim champion, yet the interim champion is defending that belt, which is just embarrassing for the UFC, and in my opinion is not a good look.
For my money, the best era was probably right around 2012 or 2013. Why, you might be asking? Well, they still had plenty of UFC stars meshed in with some of the Pride ones, plus the influx of Strikeforce heavyweights. JDS and Kane were in the midst of perhaps the greatest heavyweight rivalry ever. And you had a ton of top names like Verdum, Big Nog, Alistair, Mark Hunt, Travis Brown, Frank Mir, Stipe Miocic, DC, Barnett, Bigfoot, and Roy Nelson. There were plenty of former and future champs, including interim champs in that bunch. It was so much more stacked than now from a competitive perspective. I wouldn't say the heavyweight division now is the worst it's ever been though. That's gotta be the Tim Sylvia run when he was champ.
Yeah, definitely the heavyweight division now isn't terrible, but it's lacking the, I guess, major vibrato that it could have, if Jon Jones was an active champion and if he were to face, the persons that he should face, which is, of course, Tom Aspinall. And I think that right now, the heavyweight division is at a weak point because of none other than Jon Jones. Let's go ahead and be honest.
Big fan of spiders.
The guy literally lost to everyone else from his era before and after it. They just didn't happen to be in the division at the same time. No, really, every other champion from that time period. He also got the title just after Josh Barnett tested positive for steroids and was kicked out of the UFC. Then not to mention Sylvia, when he first won it, even though he tested positive too and was stripped as well, he was allowed to stick around. So then guess what happened?
But I got bit by a radioactive Osama bin Laden.
All right.
Mir beat him and got into a crazy, awful motorcycle accident. So it was pretty much just the Sylvia and Arlovsky show until Couture came back and beat him. Yeah, it was bad.
Coming in, you gave up 7 inches, 43 pounds, 13 years. That said, what were you thinking when you nearly put him to sleep 15 seconds into the fight?
Well, I think I was as shocked as everybody else in the arena when he went down from that first punch.
No, Randy Couture belongs at 205. He saw an opportunity when our heavyweight division was weak to move up and win the title. He's a smart guy.
But now, after the Blades fight, it's basically just Aspinall that's still here. super skeptical of what Dana said about Jones and Stipe being willing to fight him after their rumored fight for November. If the winner does fight him, we're in a much better place. Or at the very least, if Jones wins, at least we have some finality here. But Aspinall is definitely a great champion, which you couldn't have said about 2002 until 2007 when Randy Couture, who, mind you, was on a 2-fight losing streak the last time he'd been there, basically saved the division. So it was fucked in so many ways back then. In terms of star power being its strongest, Brock Lesnar's sales are pretty damn hard to beat.
In 2007, he made his MMA debut in some shitty organization somewhere, and then he came over to us.
His blockbuster fights after and before that, which includes Randy Couture, who he won the title from, to Mir and Carwin after. The sales speak for themselves on those pay-per-view buy rates, almost all selling over 1 million for Brock. The fight with Alistair after he lost the title being the lone exception, but that was still around 750,000, which is massive. So yeah, definitely not a good look for heavyweights in comparison to all this now. Heavyweight is absolutely in decline, but certainly not the worst it's ever been to give it some balance. So then
It was definitely at a decline without a doubt, and I honestly really do feel like the only fighter who's pretty much putting the entire heavyweight division on his back, without a doubt, is Tom Aspinall.
moving on, what about light heavyweights? Well, first off, just like Aspinall for heavyweight, I say thank God for Alex Pereira. This division has needed someone like him for a very long time. Yuri was fantastic, but there was a big injury break there, and he never really had the consistency to get it established. But there are some pretty strong talents in the division. I might actually be swayed to say now that Pereira would beat Ankalaev, but that is a huge question at this stage in his career because he's never fought a great wrestler like that. Ankalaev is vicious on the ground. I don't care if he's not popular, that's not the point. He can be boring, but still be very good. But yeah, this was the division that kind of inspired this video. It's abundantly clear this division is nowhere near the prestige it had in its glory days. I mean, we're talking about the old marquee division. If you're a fan who's started watching in recent
Very, very true. I feel like now the UFC light heavyweight division is very, very good. You know, there is a lot of hype behind it. Specifically talking about, you know, the champion, you know, in the division, that is Alex Pereira, who has a lot of eyes on him because he's been very, very active, and in my opinion, already has a legendary career in MMA, and it's a very short MMA career, by the way. But I really do think that it's in a decently good spot right now in the UFC's timeline.
years. I won't blame you for being shocked to hear that because it's been far from that for a very long time now. But back when the UFC sacked off 155 pounds, yes, they actually did that. Thank God for BJ Penn who came back. This was when 205 pounds ruled the world. For my money, it was at its most competitively stacked right around the time that Jon Jones took over. When Jones won, he took the title from an all-time great in Shogun Rua, who was still in his prime years, who himself just took out the otherwise untouchable, almost literally, by the way, Lyoto Machida.
That was like my worst prediction of all time. Welcome to the Machida era. Probably my worst prediction.
No,
ever.
there was a Machida era.
No, not like that. Like, he lost right away.
Before him, it was Rashad, Griffin, Rampage, and Chuck Liddell. And by the way, Jones beat most of those guys while they were still in their prime. 2014 is also a great comparison, as many regarded DC even back then as the number 2 pound-for-pound best behind Jon Jones, and that's when he earned his title shot, although it got rescheduled for 2015, while Gus did get his legendary shot in 2014. That's also the time Anthony Johnson was fucking everybody up. In terms of star power, though, there is zero doubt in my mind that it is 2007. Chuck was still champion, then meanwhile Vanderlei and Rampage were just pouring into the division as Pride and WFA got purchased.
But look, let me be honest. In terms of development, right, and what we know for the sport in today's era, there is a big debate on quality of fights. And let's just be honest, man. In my opinion, I feel like now we know a little bit more about the sport, you know, but the style of fights that we are fighting or that we're seeing nowadays isn't the same style of fights from back then. There is a new meta. There is a new way to win, you know? So in terms of, I guess, efficiency, we are finding more efficient fighters nowadays. If you want to equate that to having better quality fighters, I understand your argument. However, in terms of excitement and what we could expect to see and hope to see in the octagon, without a doubt, the Chuck Liddell era, the John Jones era was, in my opinion, a little bit more exciting to watch from a viewer's perspective, right? Not from a, I guess, purist, right, of the sport itself, but more as someone who just wants to see a good fight, if that makes any sense at all.
But right up until that point, Chuck himself was on a 5-fight win streak. Tito was still a massive drawback then himself. This was no mistake about it, the glory days of the light heavyweight division, and they were all clashing between the two biggest organizations after Pride came in. Couture had moved up by this point, but he also helped blow it up to the point it was by 2007. Hopefully though, for now, things continue in the direction that Pereira has catapulted it to. It's definitely not the strongest it's ever been by any means, but I would argue he is kind of single-handedly rising it all up due to his star power and ability. So then middleweight, yes, a division that I would actually personally consider to be in pretty good health right now.
Yes.
Between Dricus, Adesanya, Strickland, who have traded wins and losses.
The middleweight division, sorry, I'm pausing a little bit too much, but let me just say this. The middleweight division, in my opinion, right now, is probably the second most entertaining division next to the bantamweight division. I know we're going to get down to bantamweights in a little bit, later on in this video, but I think that the middleweight division right now could be at second place, in this current timeline that we're seeing from the UFC of it, being, the second greatest next to the bantamweight division. In this current timeline in the UFC, but let's go ahead and keep watching.
Strickland's the next fight. The people want to see that fight. That's the fight that people want to see, and that's the fight right now that people think is the next best guy. I mean, does he want to cry again?
But there are so many great guys below them. Whitaker and Chimaev are finally going to have their fight, it looks like, coming up, and they're at the top of their game. Costa is still putting on mostly competitive fights. The Strickland fight wasn't great, but he did manage to land a massive head kick on Whitaker recently. Then there are emerging talents like Brendan Allen, Caio Borralho, or Michel Pereira. Of course, some of the prospects that recently lost have plenty of time to regain ground too. In terms of when this division was its best though, I think most would be tempted to say Anderson Silva's era, but as someone who was a fan back then, it felt pretty light. I mean, Anderson himself earned a title shot off of one UFC debut fight against Chris Lieben. A lot of people were not happy about that at the time. The overall feeling was that it wasn't obvious who the next prospect or guy coming up was going to be with any real promise.
Probably 2 fights away from literally emptying out the 185-pound division.
If he needs to challenge himself, we've got a division right above him that would be very challenging.
The bad problem to have is Anderson Silva and nobody's a fight in 185 pounds.
Of course, that's no knock at all on Anderson. He was way ahead of his time and still the middleweight GOAT easily. It's not his fault the division was comparatively thinner through much of his reign. Let's be honest, he's part of the reason because he beat so many of them. For my money though, the time this division was probably the most stacked was a couple of years later, around 2017 or 2018. GSP had just joined the fray against Bisping, of course, so he kind of had the GOAT of another division join. But Rockhold and Weidman were still in their prime, and there was some truly terrifying guys like Yoel. Izzy was quickly making a name for himself in 2018. Whitaker had earned himself interim gold. Mousasi in 2017 was still around for a bit before he got too fed up with the whole gridlock title picture and went to Bellator.
All these guys I've defeated, they're making more money than me. What is it? My nationality? Do you want me to dye my hair blonde? What the fuck?
Gastelum was on the rise. Jacare and Anderson. Derek Brunson was on a tear. Uriah Hall, Costa. There was just a lot going on at the time. But even still, I would say the biggest star-driven era for middleweight has to be Silva's reign. The Chael clashes were gigantic sellers, each nearing 1 million buys, unifying the Pride and UFC titles with Dan Henderson. The Vitor Belfort fight was estimated to be watched by about 25 million people. That's about 1/8 of the country, guys. And of course, the losses to Weidman were truly gigantic pay-per-view sellers.
What the
rematch
fuck?
topped 1 million buys, according to reports. Superstar shit. All right, then what about welterweight? I would actually argue it might be the best it's ever been right now. On top of Leon, who was just until recently putting together a great defense record, congrats to Bilal on that, Usman is still here, and he's arguably...
Welterweight's the best ever right now?
the second greatest. Now he has an arguable chance to win the title now that Leon's lost. Other than that, he went up a weight class on short notice. I certainly wouldn't argue that was the best version of him at that moment. So we have some all-time legacy champs active at the same time in the division on top of a bevy of talent like, holy shit, Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think he'll probably be the next champion in the division. Or how about Jack Della Maddalena? Ian Gary, whether he is popular or not, is entering the top 5. Colby still has some time to return to form if I give him the benefit of the doubt. Gilbert Burns, MVP, Sean Brady, Stephen Thompson. I'm sure plenty of you will disagree, but I think this might actually be the best it's ever been from a purely competitive perspective. It is extremely competitive right now. The best argument against it in terms of competitiveness, though, is definitely going to be the tail end of GSP's run. As he was getting ready to step away, there were so many new next level challenges emerging around 2013. You had Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, Johnny Hendricks just after he was KOing guys like John Fitch and Campman. Koscheck was still putting on great fights. Jake Shields had just beaten Tyron Woodley in a very close fight, and he even took on Maya in another close one, while Lawler was on the rise to his title run along with Rory McDonald. So you can definitely make the case for
that these names just bring back so many
the
memories.
time period, and I'd respect that. This was also the time GSP sold some of his biggest pay-per-views, so I think it also happens to be the best star-driven era for welterweight too. I think the Nick Diaz fight was his biggest seller, by the way. So yeah, a great time in the sport, but I think welterweight is pretty great today too. For 155, we perhaps have the greatest title streak underway with Islam Makhachev, at least in terms of sheer numbers. One more win and he'll have broken the all-time defense record.
I feel like the last couple of years, man, the last 6, 7, 8 years, man, it's pretty tough to beat the freaking lightweight division. The lightweight division has been putting on a lot of great fights for the UFC, a lot of big, huge fights for the UFC, a lot of memorable ones. You know, I think that it's pretty tough to beat the lightweight division right now, you know? Yeah.
With 4. Nothing is guaranteed in this sport, even if I do have him beating anyone else at the moment. But it's a really weird time for the class too, as a lot of its top guys may be on the way out soon. Dustin Poirier.
Holy man, this is so sad to say, yeah, but like, there's a lot of guys right now in the lightweight division that are getting old, man. Michael Chandler is out of here. Justin Gaethje maybe has 1 or 2 more fights. Dustin Poirier said he has 1 left. Charles Oliveira, I think it's like about to be 34, 35, so he's getting up there in age as well. You know, oh man, the lightweight division right now is looking pretty open, you know. I think that any young up-and-comer, you know, could probably make a big freaking stride if they really dedicate themselves, you know, because in the next 1 to 2 years, the lightweight division could be looking a little interesting.
Is openly question his career path going forward.
Like, what else am I fighting for? Just to fight for the thrill, because I am addicted to it, no doubt, but like, we'll see. I don't know, but this could be my last fight.
Gaethje's had some rough losses as of late too. Then again, it was Oliveira and, of course, Max's greatness on display. Before that, he was on the verge of potentially getting a new title shot. Conor and Chandler are sort of 155ers, but they've been talking about 170, of course. Conor never fights at 155 unless it's a title fight. And the guys challenging for the belt that have the best opportunities have already lost to Islam, like Oliveira or Sarukian. And who knows, if Max Holloway wants to be more active at 155, there's a path there too. Either way, it's good, but I wouldn't consider lightweight what it was. Easily though, we already know 2018 Conor and Khabib's clash destroyed the 2 million pay-per-view threshold mark at 2.4 million, where no other pay-per-view has come even close. But I also think that's probably when the division was also at its deepest. In addition to those big names and all-time talents, you had prime Tony Ferguson. Gaethje had just joined and Eddie Alvarez was still there. But Poirier was killing it too. Nate Diaz was still a top 10 talent, plus Kevin Lee, Prime Barbosa, Islam, and Dariush were rising up as well. Without a doubt, a wild powder keg mix of star power and top-level talent. So certainly...
So here's where I'm going to disagree. I think that, yeah, Khabib Nurmagomedov was definitely dominant. I feel like the deepest was a couple of years ago when we had Charles Oliveira as champion. Then, you know, obviously we had Justin Gaethje in the top 5. We had Dustin Poirier in the top 5. You know, we had people that were coming up as well, like Michael Chandler. He was making his transition from Bellator to the UFC, and he was a champion there. You know, and he made a lot of, you know, he had pretty decent fights in the UFC whenever he first came around. In my opinion, maybe like 3-4 years ago, right? I think it's whenever the UFC was definitely the deepest in terms of like how hard it even was to get a title shot, right? Because there were so many good fighters ranked out, obviously in the, you know, 4, 5, 3, 2 spot, you know, in the UFC. But that's just my opinion. Even though, yeah, Khabib Nurmagomedov was a very dominant champion, had a dominant career, had a great fight against, you know, Conor McGregor. I kind of disagree with this. I think that in terms of like when the UFC was definitely at its toughest was maybe 3, 4, 2 years ago, in my opinion.
Lightweight has seen better days, but by all means, I don't think it's bad now. Then moving down to 145, there is little doubt the most star-driven era also is going to be with Conor here, even if it was a short amount of time, relatively speaking. So the real question is then, when was it the most competitively stacked? Well, now I think you have an extremely strong case for that. You have two.
Now, definitely, without a doubt, we have Volkanovski, one of the deepest, you know, fighters in the UFC in terms of development. This guy is really freaking good, man. Alexander Volkanovski, in terms of his system, his development in wrestling, grappling, striking is extremely freaking high. Ilya Topuria knocked that man out. We have Max Holloway that's also in the division. There's also a list of other guys, you know, that are in the division as well that are making, you know, a come up. We have Movsar Evloev. You know, we have Aljamain Sterling, who is a former champion from the bantamweight division that moved up to the featherweight division. So there is a lot of great stuff that's right now in the featherweight division. And I think that right now, in terms of quality fighters, you know, that are ranked in the top 10, definitely, without a doubt, the featherweight division.
Two of the top 3 featherweights of all time
in today's era.
I'm still active and in the title picture. Max Holloway is bigger than ever and definitely in line for Ilya, who, if he can do something impressive there to Max, holy shit. Max looks so phenomenal right now, though. So I'm very excited for that fight.
Obviously, this is personal. I say it's the greatest knockout of all time.
I still think Volk could earn a rematch soon with 1 or 2 more wins and is absolutely capable of doing that. But beyond those 3, Ortega and Yair are still there, but you have some crazy good prospects in the wings like Evloev, Arnold Allen. If that fight had the new grounded knee rule, Allen would probably have won that fight. That's how close those 2 are. Algier just moved up to 145, so he's there now. Nathaniel Wood and Lerone Murphy are on their rise, but Diego Lopez is definitely the biggest new star. 145 is...
Oh yeah, Diego Lopez, I forgot about him. Guy to keep your eye on. Nathaniel Wood, okay. You know, I still feel like we need to see a lot more from him in terms of development and decision making, because I feel like he doesn't make the greatest championship level decisions, in my opinion. But not a bad fighter. You know, he has a ton of time to develop and a ton of time to pretty much figure it out. But yeah, a lot of good fighters in the featherweight division right now.
Stacked. Well, 2015 was a great time with Aldo still, of course, on top until the end of the year, with Conor swooping in and leaving by the end of the year. Max Holloway was nearing his title opportunity. Volk hadn't even made it to the UFC yet, so it was super early for him. Edgar did KO Mendes at the end of 2015, which did earn him another title shot. Too bad Conor didn't stick around for that. So it was definitely bigger in name value for that short amount of time, but a good bit thinner in terms of overall competitive levels. Perhaps we should say when Volk and Max were in their trilogy was the best era competitively, but I would argue now is the best it's ever been, with Ilya now in the mix too. A lot of fresh matchups with him being champion. So then how about bantamweights? Well, the present day might actually be the most star-powered.
I am telling you guys right now, in terms of star power, talent, development, you know, what else is out there? You know, in terms of all those 3, the bantamweight division, in my opinion, is the most interesting without a doubt. You know, great, solid fighters with solid fundamentals in every aspect of the game. Grappling, wrestling, striking. We could just freaking list off a whole bunch of fighters. Of course, we got Umar, we got Marab, we got Sean O'Malley. You know, I could go on, but there is a lot of great stuff going on in the bantamweight division. In my opinion, it is the deepest in terms of talent, in terms of development, and in terms of star power. Let's keep going.
Ever experienced. Trust me, Dominic Cruz might be my favorite fighter ever. Personally, I might have been more invested in 2016 when he won the title back, leading to Garbrandt and then all that craziness with TJ Dillashaw on Tough. But the numbers really don't lie for Sean O'Malley. I'm not arguing everybody loves him, but clearly a fuck ton of people do. For one, he has an all-time GATE attached to his name. Before UFC 303, which remember was supposed to be Conor's return card against Chandler before his toe got fucked up, that still clearly reflected in the event sales even after he left. It definitely would have been much bigger had he stuck around, but many buyers were still happy to stick around despite all of that with Pereira at the top of it. Either way, the point is UFC 299 was the number 5 biggest UFC live gate of all time and just got bumped down to number 6 after UFC 303. By the way, even when adjusted for inflation, it's still bigger than all the other top 10 gates behind it, with the exception of UFC 129, which was at the Rogers Centre in Canada, headlined by GSP with 55,000 tickets sold. Fair enough to be behind something like that. But UFC 299 with O'Malley has bigger ticket sales than John Jones's return last year. 299 was a great card, you can make that argument if you like, but outside of Poirier in the co-main event, who sold half the ticket sales when he main evented a couple of months ago against Islam, it's pretty clear O'Malley was the difference maker here. Again, a great card for us hardcores, of course, but your average casual fan isn't aware of a lot of these fighters. Oh, and going back to Cruz vs. TJ, which was on television, not pay-per-view, and even with 2016 being adjusted for today's inflation, is only about 1.7 million compared to the 14 million or so of UFC 299. Yeah, that's like a factor of 10. But to argue against myself, UFC on top of the inflation has definitely ratcheted up their ticket prices. Even still though, he sold more than Jones, which was only a year ago. I wish we could somehow know pay-per-view numbers, as that would be a much better indicator, but ESPN doesn't release those like the old days. Anyway, is bantamweight the most competitive era now?
Yes.
Well, it's really high up there for me. Aside from O'Malley, there is Merab, Jan, Sanhagen, Cejudo, Figgy just joined the weight class, Aldo came back, Umar Nurmagomedov could be champion. It's a heavily stacked class and it feels very competitive. For the argument against it though, yeah, I probably would go back to 2016 with Cruz and TJ fighting. Barao was still somewhat touted, Faber out.
I think this is a little biased in my opinion. This era was great, but in terms of development and how tough each fight it is for ranked fighters now, I think now is way more competitive in terms of everything. Literally everything, every aspect.
Joe was actually already in the top 5, which I really don't remember, but this is what it shows on the Wayback Machine in 2016. Kind of blows my mind. Man, I really don't remember that, but shows how bad a person's memory can be at times. So maybe you could go either way on this one. It doesn't matter. Today's bantamweight division is incredibly good. I certainly wouldn't say this class is in a decline. In fact, it's on an incline. Arguably the best it's ever been, or close to it. Now on to the last of the men's divisions, flyweight. And yeah, it's not the
flyweight division right now, I think, is probably the weakest division out of all the divisions. The UFC, let's go ahead and be honest. The only person that I can see probably selling fights in the flyweight division is someone like a current, very recent fan favorite like Steve Erceg, Alexander Pantoja, Kai Kara France, Moreno whenever he decides to come back, Albazi, that's been inactive, I think, due to injury. But besides that, there is not really much going on in the flyweight division.
Best place right now, especially considering how that Steve Erceg situation went. It just felt,
and that's saying a lot with the flyweight division being at its best as ever been now. That says a lot, man, because the flyweight division is probably the weakest division out of all the divisions in the UFC right now, today.
Felt rushed and kind of strange. Erceg arguably even won that fight, so it's not a great look for Pantoja either. But yeah, since Moreno, the division's sunken down a bit. Figgy's left, Mikhaev just got canned. But there are definitely some great new talents. I'm a huge fan of Tatsuro Taira. Certainly Manel Kape is close despite the Mikhaev loss, and probably should have had a point taken away in that fight, which might have changed things. And of course, Amir Albazi should be ready soon, so maybe he's next for the title that has been teased lately. Kai Kara France is fantastic, and I thought he deserved the Albazi win, by the way. But without a doubt, the most competitive time for this weight class, it's got to be 2018.
Yes, unfortunately, that Demetrius Johnson fought in the UFC whenever, in my opinion, in terms of development and the quality of fighter, was at its highest. Fortunately, you know, the division wasn't really hyped back then, you know, because it's little guys fighting. But it is what it is.
It's when Cejudo just edged out Demetrius Johnson in their rematch. You could argue those are the two best flyweights of all time. Certainly DJ is the greatest on his own. So Cejudo just really didn't stick around too long after that to earn a second place spot in the division all time. But you have some incredible talents with Joseph Benavidez, Dustin Ortiz, Sergio Pettis, and even Horiguchi had only just left. Meanwhile, future champs like Figgy, Moreno, and Pantoja were becoming active in the division. That's a no-brainer for me in terms of the most competitive time around 2018. But weirdly, this was also when the UFC began to dismantle the division, as Dana was on the brink of getting rid of it altogether. Even traded DJ away for Ben Askren to one championship. Think about that. But yeah, Dana was very open that the division appeared to be failing. That's the whole reason he was looking at getting rid of it.
That division is a division that I battled for a very long time and defended and said, are you people crazy? Well, how do you not like these fights? How do you not like the champ? It never really became a popular division. So even with such a dominant champion, even if it goes away, guys like Benavidez and guys like that could move up a weight class too.
So you could argue that Cejudo saving it was the most popular time, but he pretty much immediately left after his first defense with TJ. So the most star-driven time for the division isn't a massive peak or anything, but it would probably have to be Figgy and Moreno's tetralogy, quadrilogy. Whatever, 4 fights. In the past, fans were literally booing DJ's fights. No, that really happened.
Did the boos bother you at all? Fans are fans. They're just fucking idiots.
But Figgy and especially Moreno were legitimate fan favorites with tons of fan support. Cejudo might have saved it, but Figgy and Moreno kept it going for sure. Is it in a decline? I don't know, maybe. It's a...
Yes, it is in a decline, without a doubt. I feel like everybody felt the decline. You know, whenever Moreno decided to leave, whenever he lost the championship, to be more specific, I think that, you know, a lot of people kind of stopped watching the flyweight division. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Moreno had a huge fan base that was Mexican. Go ahead and be honest, man. And numbers don't lie. Numbers do not freaking lie.
Weird time for the division, not as popular as its best period, but then again, it was never really popular even when it should have been. Maybe the same as it's always been? I don't know if that's a hot take. It's always been kind of rough, to be honest. Okay then, so that's all the men's divisions. So what about the most exciting division in sports history? Of course, I'm a liar, I'm lying. Women's featherweight has barely ever even existed. I mean, it's done, right? When even was the last 145 women's fight? Okay, so it's pretty much defunct. This one's easy. Cyborg and Amanda Nunes clashed in 2018, which was obviously the pinnacle for many reasons. Other than that, it was never really a division. It's kind of based around 1 or 2 people the whole time. So then let's go on to the first real women's weight class, for lack of a better word, women's bantamweight. We easily know the biggest star-driven time. It's not even a question. It's going to be Rousey when she was on top, selling multiple 1 million plus pay-per-view buy cards. Considering she had 2 in 2015, that has to be it. This also just so happens to be when Holly Holm took her out. It would move to Miesha Tate, and then the women's GOAT, Amanda Nunes. Even Kat Zingano was active around the time, and she was the last person to have beaten Amanda Nunes. So I think this all crosses both of those boxes. It's the most competitive and star-driven time simultaneously in the weight class's history.
I don't know.
As for today, though, man, it's pretty bad. I'm sure Rocky Pennington is a perfectly fine and nice human being, but even with a 6-fight win streak,
there is literally no women fighter that I would like to watch. Oh, yes, there is. I'm lying. There is a woman from last week. I forgot her freaking name, and I think her name's like Wong or something like that, but she fought last week and she knocked out her opponent. Beautiful freaking KO, man. I want to see her fight again. She is very exciting to watch. Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko, I mean, besides that, what is there in the women's division? You guys let me know down in the comments if I'm tripping or not, because really not that many women fighters that, I'm excited to watch. I'm just being honest.
It's hard for me to see her as the heir apparent champion, considering she lost to Holm twice, GDR. Famously, she wanted to quit mid-fight against Amanda Nunes.
She's done.
And only now that they're gone has she become champion. I would still pick all three of those people over her if they were to fight again. I guess Holm is still around, but she's 42, so what can you do? This division is absolutely in decline. It's bad.
How bad?
Pretty bad. I mean, we're super duper, really super bad. I mean, the worst.
So I really hope Kayla Harrison makes it to a title shot, at least some sort of big flag-bearing championship to help this division along. Pena, as disliked as she is, brings something to the division with wildcard shit talk. Bad as that might be, at least it's something. She is at least a former champion too, and Amanda has teased a return against Harrison if she does win.
To win a UFC title, and if Amanda wants to come back, I'll welcome her with open arms.
So yeah, bantamweight is in dire need of help at the moment. On the opposite side of things, the women's flyweight is probably the best it's ever been. For one, it's actually competitive at the top for once, and there are compelling matchups in the wings. You've got Grasso and Shevchenko capping off their trilogy. Manuel Fiorot showed how well she can deal with grappling. It would be really interesting to see her clash particularly with Shevchenko on the feet, because that's their specialty, or how does she deal with Grasso? Of course, Anne Blanchfield did just lose to Fiorot, and not the greatest showing, but does have a ton of potential and has smashed just about everybody else. She actually looked undersized there, which was interesting. I'm sure we'll see her back soon, though. Macy Barber's on a hot streak and looking better than ever, and there are the Natalia Silvias on the way up too, plus the new additions like Rose Namajunas. I'm definitely not saying it's a perfect division, but it's definitely more competitive than it's ever been. For a while, it was basically just the Shevchenko division, so I would say this is on the incline. I would call it the best WMMA division at the moment. But traditionally, you would have said that about women's strawweight, and so yeah, let's address why I would say that right now. Without a doubt, the time it was the most competitive has to be the most star power driven time, which was around 2020.
I freaking forgot about Zhang Wei Li. I'm so sorry freaking for everybody, all the Zhang Wei Li fans, man. Zhang Wei Li, absolutely a fighter that I definitely love watching as well.
That's when it had one of the best title fights ever between Zhang and Joanna. Rosewood captured the title from Zhang not too long after. Jessica Andrade was still a huge threat. Those are also nearly all the biggest women's stars of the last few years, all duking it out at the same time. So yeah, that was its best era competitively and in terms of star power. But what about now? Well, I suppose it's fine. Zhang is carrying the division right now, kinda. It helps that Yan Jianan brought it for 300 and they put on a classic. Tatiana Suarez hopefully is next if she can stay healthy. I've been so hyped about her for so long, just like many of you have, but she literally has some of the worst luck health-wise of just about any fighter or person on the planet. She's been so dominant, but just not able to capitalize. And she's a threat at 125 pounds too. But other than that, the rest of the division isn't at its best right now. Perhaps Verna Jandiroba can prove me wrong. It's not terrible with some of those fights coming up, but I would definitely say this class is in decline. So that's my way too long assessment of each division and how healthy they currently are. Overall, that's 11 divisions with, I would say, 3 in decline pretty definitively. Mostly the women's divisions, let's be honest. 3 of them are pretty typical. And an incline for the rest. I think the larger overarching narrative is, yeah, heavyweight sucks, women's bantamweight sucks, and women's strawweight isn't the greatest. And in terms of light heavyweight, it's always kind of been fucked as long as John Jones has been around. I mean, what was it, 2015 that he had to vacate his title? It's really been kind of fucked since then, and it's had a few kind of rebounding moments, and we're kind of in one now. Again, for heavyweight, it's not the worst it's ever been, but having to go all the way back 20 years to like the 2003 Tim Sylvia era is pretty bad. The other 8 divisions are improving, or what I would consider normal, and there are a fair few amount of stars, not on the level of 2015, 2016 maybe, but I'll talk about this more in detail in the next section. So then, the elephant in the room that's left, card quality. I think this is probably the biggest.
Oh my lord, ladies and gentlemen, I could talk about this for freaking hours, but let me just say this. The UFC has been feeding us fight nights that I don't even care to watch. And that says a lot as someone who actually covers the freaking sport on a YouTube channel. There has been multiple freaking fight nights where I'm just like, wow, I cannot wait to get through these prelims. I cannot wait to get through these early prelims. Who are these fighters? I've never heard of these guys. Oh, I've heard of this guy. I've heard of this fighter, but the guy that he's fighting, he's lost like 3 fights in a row, and he just came into the UFC in a one fight contract. Like, who are these people, right? And they're fighting in the freaking Apex, right? Why are they fighting on the freaking Apex makes no sense to me, because in my opinion, combat sports should always be in front of a crowd. It makes no sense why they should be fighting in a freaking Apex arena where they can only fit maybe like 50 to 100 people. It doesn't make any sense to me at all, right? And this has been a recent thing, especially this past year and the year before, where we've pretty much witnessed a lot of low quality fight nights. Let's go ahead and watch
Pain
this.
point in MMA right now. It feels like there's just been an epidemic of passable cards lately. I mentioned Sergey Spivak earlier versus Tybura 2. Rosenstruck versus Gaziev was a weird one, and I would contend in May that sadly Derek Lewis versus Czech's Notes or Rodrigo Nascimento, really only because of Lewis, was the biggest name main event that whole month. Pantoja versus Urseg was the biggest otherwise. But maybe that was just the price of UFC 300 being so stacked like everyone's been saying. But we have had some of the most stacked pay-per-view cards ever lately. UFC 300, we did a piece on that before it happened, compared it to the best cards of all time, and it was more stacked than all of them. Thankfully, it delivered too. UFC 299 was great, and UFC 303 was weird, but it did pull through, and it ended up being pretty great. And UFC 304 was probably the biggest card in UK history, with 2 champions headlining. It's really unprecedented for the region. So, is it true then? Are cards worse than ever right now, balancing fight night?
Yes, this shouldn't even really be a debate anymore. Yes, they are at definitely an all-time low, specifically the fight nights, right? I feel like the pay-per-view cards are good, but this is just an idea. I feel like they should definitely put a lot more top 5 ranked fighters, instead of putting them, to pretty much be the co-main event, or pretty much like the first fight of the main card. Have them headline, fight nights, right? Make it interesting. Like the Barajo versus Jared Cannonier fight that we just had last week. Great card, great fight, great main event. More fights at that, at that level at main events. Keep it consistent. Some of the fights that we've had in other previous fight nights, like I said, skip. But that's just my opinion.
Nights and pay-per-views versus the past. Well, I took a deep dive through cards over the years to determine this, so let me hit you with some quick stats. 2005 is the year of the Tough Boom, which obviously was when the UFC got their first TV deal, meaning they went from 5 events in all of 2004, can you imagine that? That happens in almost 1 month now, to more than double that with 10 in 2005. By the way, 8 of those cards aired after the Tough finale, the first season, in April. So naturally, this was the jump off point. Cards would nearly double to 18 cards in 2006, then inch up to 20 over the next couple of years, 24 events in 2010, 27 in 2011, but that really changed when the UFC left Spike TV and went with Fox, for a boatload of reasons. Fox is a multi-network brand. There was, of course, Big Fox, then FX, FS1, FS2, FXX, or how about Fuel TV, if you remember some of those earlier names. So yeah, Fox was a much hungrier beast to feed than Spike TV. They needed more content for all of those channels. So to concur with all of that, the UFC started to fold in all the new lighter weight classes from the WEC.
More content. Is that the issue? Is that the issue that we are witnessing now, ladies and gentlemen? This is just an idea, right? If the UFC has shit cards right now because of low content, wouldn't it make more sense to add another division? Let's throw another division out there, a new weight class, right? let's add another champion, you know, so we could just have more to watch, right? Instead of them trying to fill up fight nights with low quality fights, let's add a new weight class. Let's make things interesting. Let's get the fans more involved, right? Let's get the fans more hyped up about MMA and the UFC. If it's a content issue, let's throw in a new weight class. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments.
Strikeforce was beginning to merge, and by 2013, the first women's division with bantamweight was brought in too. So suddenly the UFC had a much larger set of weight classes, talent, and divisions that could...
So they added divisions back then. What's stopping them from doing it now, if now the UFC is definitely suffering from a content standpoint? Add another division. It makes sense.
Fill Fox's multi-network airtime. This means that from 2011's 27 events, the UFC would nearly double their output by 2014. It got all the way up to 46, or what would have been 47 if UFC 176 wasn't canceled due to Aldo getting an injury. In comparison to the present day, it's been around 42 or 43 for the past couple of years. And dude, yeah, 2014 was an awful year to ramp up like this. Anderson Silva's reign had just ended. A massive star was gone that entire year with a broken leg. GSP had just vacated his welterweight title and semi-retired. We didn't know he was ever coming back. Rousey had not emerged yet as a pay-per-view star, and I certainly didn't see that coming on the horizon. Conor was a rising star, but like Rousey, wouldn't emerge as a pay-per-view star until 2015. By then, you didn't even know he was going to win the title in that weight class, much less two. Cruz was in and out that year with wild injuries that were taking over. Kane's injuries were starting to mount this whole year as he didn't even compete in 2014, and while DJ and Aldo were active and long-standing champions, they were not big sellers or bankable stars. It was kind of just the John Jones show in terms of bankable talent. Even then, his pay-per-views weren't that high. The big Gus card only did like 300,000 buys. DC did like 800,000 buys, but that was the following year. Brock was long gone. Nick Diaz was semi-retired, and Nate was a couple years from stardom. So you pair that with the ridiculous jump in events from 33 the year prior to 46. Holy shit, did that feel like a down year. I distinctly remember reading articles at that time positing if that maybe, just maybe, the sport had hit its peak and this would kind of be it. I'm not sure I believe those, but it was a compelling point. So oddly, 10 years ago feels like one of the most appropriate comparisons to now. And there were some truly awful quality cards here too. James Tahuna at one point headlined against Nate Marquardt. I mean, dude, Marquardt was on a 3-fight losing streak, and Tahuna was already on a 2-fight losing streak. He would lose this, lose one more, and he was gone. Or how about Tarek Safadine versus Hyun Gu Lim? What, sir? Safadine had made his name off of starting that skid that Marquardt went on by 2014, but himself was 2-2 since joining the UFC. And in addition to losing this fight, he was let go after his next loss to RDA. The point is, 2014 kind of sucked. By all means, there were absolutely great moments in 2014, but the same could be said of this year. Great moments don't make the whole year. They'll make a card, they'll make a night, they might even make a month, but not a whole year. Anybody else remember 2017? 2016 was phenomenal and definitely a peak at the time, but really the first half of 2017 was abysmal. The first pay-per-view of the year was GDR versus Holm, which is infamous for how poor the reffing was and how meaningless the title was considering GDR just vacated it. She didn't want to fight Cyborg. UFC 209 was ripe for one of the Diaz brothers, but instead, we didn't get either. We got a regrettable Woodley versus Thompson 2 snooze fest. Or how about Anthony Johnson's second title challenge against Cormier at UFC 210, where he chose as a devastating striker to wrestle an Olympian in Cormier and abruptly retire in the aftermath of their fight. That year's International Fight Week did only 150,000 pay-per-view buys, as Nunes vs. Shevchenko 2 was canceled the literal day of the event. Come to think of it, 2017 might actually be worse than 2014. Good thing GSP came back later on in that year, at least the year ended well. Or how about the good old days? UFC 72, a non-title headliner between Rich Franklin and Yushin Okami? That's a weird one. Or how about UFC 89 Chris Lieben versus Michael Bisping? Keep in mind, neither were close at all to the title picture, especially Chris Lieben. Or UFC 130, Rampage versus Matt Hamill. Rampage did get a title shot off this though, so maybe it's not as bad as I'm thinking, but for a headliner for a pay-per-view, come on guys. That's a fight night at best. Or would you rather just go to 2004 when there were only 5 events? Personally, I would like the number of events throughout a year to go to 30 or something like that. There's definitely a happy medium here in the quantity versus quality argument. I suppose I don't hate having a card every single week, but it is suffering. So while I do think, as I said earlier, we've had some of the best quality pay-per-views ever this year, man, the fight nights, holy shit. Yeah, they've just been getting really bad. And dude, we're also done with the Apex. I know I am. I'd be surprised to hear anybody that's not. It's an amazing thing that they utilized during the pandemic. They completely pulled it off, but the crowd can really make an event special, or at the very least give it some energy. And the Apex is making some of these awful fight nights feel even worse. But from a money perspective, objectively, the UFC is making more than it ever has. They're worth more than they ever have. And in the research for this piece, I also took a look at the trends on this from Google, and yeah, you can see a very clear upward trajectory. That's not a kill shot to this argument that the UFC may or may not be in decline. But you pair this info with what I said about some of these divisions being good or better than their peaks, with definitely some on the decline to balance it out, I'd say things are pretty good. At worst, it's normal. At best, it's better than a lot of previous years. Is it the best? No, definitely not. But like I mentioned with 2014 basically having one superstar who even then wasn't a huge seller, again, his biggest pay-per-view sales of that year was only about 350,000. It was a down year for him even. And like I said about 2017, the big stars were not even there. Half of them weren't even fighting for the entire first half of the year. So yeah, I think it's pretty objective that we're not in a decline. It's not the peaks of 2016 or 2009.
Okay, look. To end the video, let's go ahead and talk about this very, very quickly. I don't think that the UFC is in a major decline, but is it in a decline? Yes. And the thing that's driving it downwards is the quality of fights we're getting in the fight nights. I really do think that the fight nights are driving the UFC down, and the Apex cards are driving the UFC down. You know, if it's a content issue, I do think that adding a new weight division could help with a lot of what's going on in the UFC right now. We could have better quality, you know, fights because fighters would be matched up with their exact weight class a lot closely. Adding a new weight division, you know, in terms of content, we get more content, we get more champions, you know, and in my opinion, I feel like the right way to go about this, you know, for the next upcoming years is to add a new weight division, get rid of the freaking Apex, you know, and pretty much overall raise the quality of fights if we are going to have fight nights, you know. So my opinion, those are my thoughts. You know, are we in a decline? Slightly. I do really think so. You know, but overall, of course not. You know, the UFC is the fastest growing sport, or MMA is the fastest growing sport in the world right now. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. As always, man, it's a pleasure. Peace out. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a good one.